Pam Gullison. Pam Gullison has served as Senator Byron Dorgan's Chief of Staff and State Director and was also a member of the North Dakota House of Representatives for 16 years. I had the pleasure of working with her at the State House. In addition, she's a partner in her family's farming and ranching business. And, you know, I got to give credit where credit is due. And if you have a problem with this, you got to blame Dale Niesbog in the back of the room. But since we're after dinner and before a big event, I'd like everybody to stand up, please. This is my version of healthcare. Just take a little stretch, you know, maybe just stretch out. Don't knock your neighbor. We need sports going on here tonight. And then I'd like you to take your hands and maybe shake them out like this in front of you. I'm not going to stop it, they go this big, and I can see everybody. Shake your hands, please. Shake them out in front of you. Shake them over top. Switch them around a little bit. Dale, you're not participating. Shake them around. Put them together. Please help me welcome Deborah Cramer.
Finally got a standing ovation before a speech. That's awesome.
You know, I really thought that David was going to talk about the Billy Goat Tavern, and I knew David when he hardly shaved, and he's worked for the chamber, and I thought he was going to tell that story. So later, David, in private. All right. Well, thanks for coming tonight. It's great to have you both here and have this discussion. So really what we want to do is have a discussion, not a debate, and we saw the example of those discussions earlier tonight. And I know that you two have both had debates, so this is going to be a little different. Fair enough, Roger?
Fair enough.
Okay, you want to lay out any ground rules?
Well, I think an important thing here is that we have two topics today. We have energy and healthcare. We're going to try to stick to those topics today. And really what we're here to find out is about your feelings on the direction for healthcare and the direction for energy in North Dakota and what message you'll bring to Washington on behalf of the wonderful people of North Dakota. So keep to the issues and we'll have a good debate or a good discussion.
Fair enough. All right. This is going to be tough.
Well, slip there.
Pam and I will be fine.
Stage has been set.
All right. Now, Roger, the other thing about this is that the audience can participate, but probably not right away. You know, we'll start going, and there'll be questions that arise, and microphones will be floating around, and if they stray off of those topics, we'll stop them, right? All right, fair enough. We've got 45 minutes. So, how do we start? Talk about your vision for healthcare.
You care who starts?
I don't care.
All right.
That's how you do a discussion. You just look at something.
Go ahead, Pam.
Certainly. I mean, we're a country that obviously we support one another. We are a country that's built based on the strength of all of us, opportunities for each and every one of us. So this whole discussion about where we are as a nation in terms of healthcare, I think feeds into that. It says to us, what do we value? What's important to all of us? When we see some people who don't have access to healthcare, does that matter? Does that affect all of us? You know, I think it does. And so we have started down this road of having a big national discussion about healthcare. It's actually been going on for a long time, much longer than most of us even think. There's been healthcare proposals for decades, and they sort of come and go, but the passage, of course, with healthcare reform brought it all to a head. And so we are now in the process of how do we move forward? How do we start implementing this? How do we look at the strengths of the bill and make sure that it works for all of us, including not only families and individuals who need health care, but businesses, so that we don't place undue burdens on them and undue costs on them. And so I think that's what's important. The discussion this afternoon by the panels, I have to tell you, was really heartening. It was what we need to see so much more of in Washington, D.C. Reasonable people sitting at the same table, addressing a topic, not always agreeing, not always fully disagreeing, setting aside the extreme sides of the issue and really looking for common ground. And that's where I fall on all of this. I think it is time to move forward. I support reform and saying, let's look at the parts of the bill that are strong and that we want to fight for. We know the Frontier Amendment is so critically important to North Dakota. And what parts do we think are going to cause undue burdens, undue costs for businesses, and start moving forward to address those and possibly repeal some of those.
So you liked what parts of the discussion? The parts where we talked about perhaps we need to undo some of this and some of it's okay?
You know, it's a bit of all of it. I mean, you have to look at the strengths of the bill. I just mentioned the Frontier Amendment. That's $650 million directly for Medicare reimbursement for North Dakota hospitals. And as one of the panelists said today, Gary, that's critically important for his hospital. That's $10 million annually to help cover the additional costs.
Okay.
We know the pre-existing condition is very, very important. If you've ever had a major healthcare diagnosis, it weighs on your mind forever. I'm a breast cancer survivor. And anytime you've been diagnosed with something like that, you wonder if you'll ever be able to access healthcare again. So that is part of it. And there's other parts of the bill we know are important.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Kevin.
First of all, when I read the Chamber of Commerce's position on healthcare and on the Affordable Care Act, I pretty much look at my own positions, quite honestly, which probably explains why I was endorsed by the United States Chamber of Commerce. I believe that markets work. I believe that freedom works and choice works. And I frankly would prefer to repeal the Obamacare completely and then replace it with something better, because I think at the heart of Obamacare is this mandate. And without pulling out the mandate, you're really challenging the sensibilities of free people. So you can call it a tax if you want, but to me it's still a mandate. But if we're not able to do it that way, then we do have to preserve some of the good things, and we have to have some market forces. Because as the panel said today, Obamacare does not deal with the fundamental problem, and that is cost. We have to get to the root of that. And the way you can get to the root of cost, I appreciated the question about utilities or energy versus healthcare. Why is it that the inflation for utilities remains, at or below the consumer price index, but there's such tremendous hyperinflation in the healthcare industry? And I was disappointed that no one said this because of the superior regulation in the energy industry, but regulators. But I think it gets to the point when consumers aren't paying for the product, when they're not using cash to buy a product or service, they're not shopping. It's too easy to buy more. You go in and you take your $20 copay and you get your $80 a month medication for the rest of your life, and no one's dealt with the fundamental issue. I also think that we need to incent people to stay well. Our traditional healthcare system only pays if you get sick. That's perverse. If we had a healthcare savings accounts, for example, more liberal use of people's own money, allow them to go shopping, which brings down costs, allow them to stay well and keep more of their own money, that's an incentive to exercise. I appreciate that Blue Cross Blue Shield allows Chris and I to pay for part of our membership at the Y, as an example. There needs to be more incentive to stay well as opposed to get sick.
So there are good parts. I mean, as we heard this afternoon, even their healthcare experts this afternoon said there are parts of the healthcare plan or the Affordable Care Act that do make sense. They're probably needed, and there are parts. I think they used the F word around Washington, fix, because they thought, the train's kind of left the station. Are we really going to be able to appeal this, or are we better off taking a good look and fixing the things we think are not right? Well, one of the things I believe is not right is when this whole debate started. It started around the cost. And we hear from North Dakotans, me as a small business person, I look at our healthcare bill on a regular basis, and we're glad to pay it, Paul, you out there. But we look at that on a regular basis, and it keeps going up to some degree, and it becomes a big expense for your company. So, and it's a good benefit, it's a great benefit for the company, but the Affordable Care Act, it started with the word affordable, never really addressed the affordable part of healthcare. So what are you going to do when you get to Washington? You can say, we can look at this act and change some of the things that are more about access. Well, what are we going to do? What's the next step that Washington can do, or you'd bring to Washington, that might address the affordable part?
I think that is the greatest challenge of this bill. It's from the very beginning, it's the part of the bill that we identified is not doing enough. When medical inflation goes up by double-digit percentages almost every year, and yet this bill, I don't think, does nearly enough to hold those down. I'm a nutritionist. I practiced for 17 years in public health, and I had a private practice. And so my focus has always been on prevention, on wellness, on helping keep people out of the system, helping educate, helping us understand that we have to take a much stronger role individually, each of us, for our health care. And yet as a nation, we see so much of that go in the wrong direction. We see our obesity numbers climbing. We see much higher incidence of chronic illnesses, more diabetes, more blood pressure problems, higher levels of stroke. All of that leads to high healthcare costs. So my preference is to really start focusing much more on investing in the preventative side, doing just what we start seeing in some of these programs, where they do help pay for some of the, your access to be able to go to a gym, helping give you incentives when you hold down your own healthcare costs. I think that's really part, and that's all part of what we need to be doing.
So would you work at like car insurance, where if you had a better driving record, you got a better rate? Would that be something that you would think would work?
Well, obviously we do that now, you know, in healthcare to some degree. When you have a better history of healthcare, your costs can remain lower. When you have been diagnosed with any kind of a major medical, your costs are going to go up. You know that. We've seen that already. So I would prefer us to see a system where we do start incentivizing. We see that with some of the flex plans, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's a good thing. That does provide more options.
One follow-up. What role do you see government playing in that?
Well, as even part of this bill, I mean, there are a lot of provisions in here for supporting preventative health care. That's part of, I think, one of the strengths of the bill. And so as we help people understand more about how they stay healthy, we invest more in the wellness and prevention side, that will help bring down overall healthcare costs. We have to do that. We can't always focus on sort of the sick care, only addressing healthcare when people are in the system. We have to keep people out of the hospital. And the only way we'll be able to do that is by more education, more wellness, more prevention, more personal responsibility.
All right. Let me speak to some of the business issues, Roger, that, as you raised it as a small business person. Imagine that businesses now are faced with this decision. Do I provide healthcare coverage of some sort, some benefit for my employees?
And it's expensive.
It's very expensive.
It's expensive.
Or do I not do it and take the $2,000 penalty? That is an incentive not to provide healthcare for your employees, because it's going to be cheaper. And what does that lead to? It leads to exactly what I believe the goal of the founders of Obamacare wanted, and that is a single-payer system.
But on the same token, Kevin, just as a follow-up to that, you know, as an employer, you want to keep good employees, so wouldn't you offer that as an incentive anyways?
If you can afford it. But guess what Obamacare does? It incents you to keep people at 29 hours a week and keep your employee numbers at 49 or lower. I prefer an incentive to grow business, to create wealth, to provide jobs for people, and then be able to afford the incentives such as healthcare.
Would you see a government role in that incentive? What does that look like?
Well, the government, when you say a government role in the incentive, I get a little bit nervous, quite frankly.
Okay.
Incentives ought to be natural. When I say there ought to be it's a perverse incentive when you only pay out for somebody who goes to the doctor. The natural incentive should be you get to keep your own money if you don't go to the doctor. In business, anytime the government starts creating the incentives, you manipulate a free market. I think that the government ought to not mandate these kinds of things, but what it ought to do is allow the free market to work, such as, for example, if you allow, let's go to Medicare for a minute. If you allow Medicare to maybe be a premium support system for younger people, okay? Only younger people. under the age of 52, 50, 55, whatever the line might be. 54, okay, well, let's make it 54. All right, okay. Then you say to them, you have choices. And one of your choices is Medicare as we know it. Remember, that's what Barack Obama promised us with Obamacare. You will never have to leave your current system if you don't want to. So let's give them that as one of the choices. But let's say we're going to support, with premium support, the second lowest priced plan. But you find a lower priced one. You get to keep the difference. But if you want a Cadillac plan, you pay the difference. You have an incentive to go shopping. And by the way, I want to say something else about the $2,000 penalty and about the the rising costs. And oh, by the way, the caps on liability. Somebody said that the amount, I think it was Jeff that said it was 57 billion or something like that would be saved over 10 years. It wasn't a huge amount. I think signals.
That's a huge amount.
It seems like it, but in the context of the world,
okay.
Yeah. Here's my point is that I think signals into the marketplace matter. You talk about incentives. What can the government do? Most of the time, the government should do less.
Okay, but I get that. But isn't part of the problem with the whole healthcare system that we treat it like a right, we fund it like a privilege, right? And we can't turn anyone away. When they asked the question about the energy thing today, why has energy prices not jumped? Well, if you don't pay your electrical bill, they turn it off. But if you're a healthcare provider, you have to take these people. So
Exactly.
how does this all work in the incentive model and the government model?
Well,
if I can be so bold.
Yeah, and listen, I said this is a bill that has plus and minuses. I think, without question, there's a lot of things in it that we need to address. Most of us find the notion of a mandate very onerous. It's not necessarily the direction we want to go. But the reality is we all end up paying for people who don't have access to health care. We know that. When I meet with hospital administrators weekly as part of this campaign, and I can tell you that we're not turning away health care for anybody in this country. We are providing it. They can access it through the emergency room, but we never deny people health care. So the question is, how are we going to cover those costs? We see here in North Dakota, even out in the reports just in Williston over the last couple of months, where the unpaid debt at the hospital is going to be estimated at $7 million this year. Highest in the history by far of the hospital. They've never seen anything like it. And this is one of our wealthiest counties. So how is that happening? Can it be that the emergency rooms are being used at a much higher level to access health care than going through a benefit option through the employers? That's one of the big challenges. So what we know is when people don't have health insurance, we all pay. It gets passed along. It's part of why we see these escalating rates each and every year. And
Sure.
So it's part of what we have to address here.
Okay.
One of the things you'll learn about me in most presentations and most debates, you're going to hear me say this a lot. We have to consider everything within the context of a $16 trillion debt and growing. Chris and I are blessed to have our new grandbaby. And we have parents in their 70s and 80s. And we have a $16 trillion debt. We have to do everything in the context of this. That we can fund and incent all kinds of wonderful things and then have our entire economy collapse. And we haven't gone very far.
Okay. I'm not disagreeing with you.
The other side of the coin for those that can buy insurance and are working through your business, whatever, but and you get to the Medicare age, and today Medicare as we know it isn't working, or certainly won't work in the future. I think the term that was used this afternoon is it used to be 16 workers or something for every one person on Medicare. Now it's 4 workers for every one person on Medicare, and we're adding more to that more Medicare people on Medicare as the day goes on. How do we address that? How does Medicare, I know there's a couple of proposals out there on how Medicare should be addressed and how we can make it solvent for the future. And what's your feelings between two of you on which direction you'd take that?
Sure. Well, I think, first of all, I think the Medicare discussion, of course, is similar, obviously, to the healthcare discussion, including things like incenting people to live healthy lifestyles. But remember, we are dealing with people in the, the last half of their life, or the last third of their life, not the first third. So, to some degree, that train has left the station.
You're going to use healthcare.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but here's the first thing I want to do. I do want to draw a line. I don't like the generational warfare that has been the norm for political discussion on Medicare and Social Security for the last 20 or 30 years.
Like I pay it, they use it?
That kind of thing. I could tell a story about.
Soon it'll be there.
Yeah,
That'll be good, that'll be good.
Before Chris's dad died, one day he said to me, "Don't mess with Social Security. It's the greatest system in the world." I said, "For you it is." I'm paying a lot more because you're costing so much. But what I want is, my point is, I don't like the generational warfare. So I like the idea of drawing a line. It can be 55, as Paul Ryan wants it to be. It can be 50 or 54 or 52. I think this is an area where Pam and I could probably discuss it and come to a good number, or others. I think reasonable people could come up with a solution there and say, let's make sure that everybody at this age and older are not threatened by anything. They get Medicare as they know it for sure.
Okay.
That buys enough time, I think, and enough goodwill to have a discussion with younger people and with medical professionals. One of the things that struck me today, watching the panel, as much as anything, was I thought, wow, there's a lot of smart folks around here. Yeah. What an opportunity that was for me, and I'm sure for several others, to learn. And frankly, I think the great advantage of public life in North Dakota is access to the public. And that's a blessing, not just for the public, but for those of us that seek to represent them. And so I've heard lots of talk and lots of possible solutions, and I look forward to the opportunity as a member of Congress to have an open dialogue with those folks out there.
Well, the Medicare program has been such a successful program. It's the reason why when I travel around the state and I visit with senior citizens, they'll say just that: don't mess with Medicare. It has provided such important peace of mind in terms of their health care as they get into their senior years, which they earned all of their working lives. And it has very low administrative costs, 2%. And so, I focus on, let's retain the guarantee of Medicare. But how are we going to address that? We've got, it comes right back to these healthcare costs. We've got to be able to do a significant job of holding those down. I just saw a study a couple of weeks ago that said they think 30% of the costs of healthcare are from duplicative services, undue testing, the kind of things that we can really start to address, and I think everybody has. We heard it today from the panel, from the providers as well as the insurance. We're all on board in trying to address that. It's the only way we're going to do it. But I think when we have created a model that is as strong as Medicare, I don't think we move away from it. I don't support the voucher system because we don't have a system that isn't working. We know we're facing challenges because we have an aging population. That we know.
It works as long as we can fund it.
But the program itself is working, and so we have to find the ways to fund it and then reduce the overall healthcare
It works
costs.
great for the next 12 years, but if you're not going to die in the next 12 years, it's going to be 24% less to reimburse these hospitals that they're going to, and medical organizations are going to provide the services. So we can't just sort of say it's great, it's worked so well, it's super efficient, let's not do anything. We have to deal with the reality that in 12 years it is insolvent. That's according to the trustees of Medicare itself.
So it's fair to say that there's a disagreement in kind of how we approach this. And I want to be respectful of both viewpoints, and then ask, okay, so one of you is going to get elected to Congress. How are you going to fix it in this environment? I mean, we heard today clearly from people in the panel saying, get rid of the rancor, we hate it. And that's not where the vast majority of people are, but that's how the system operates, and people are tired of it.
Well, and exactly. And part of the problem is we have to stay at the table when these discussions get so challenging. I served in this state legislature for 16 years. I served on Appropriations Committee. Certainly at times when this state was not facing the kind of economic times they are now, when we had really challenging years. But we would never have considered walking out of the room at the end of the session without resolving the challenges and making sure we balance the budget and address that. Congress has the division, the partisan division, the political divides are so deep. I say this because it's so true. This is a country that was built on a democracy, on a great idea, on a wonderful ideal. But it wasn't based on extreme ideology. We would never have been able to face all the big challenges that we have faced to date without recognizing we've got to come together and find common ground. My mom is 89 years old, and she talks about this often. She's never in the history of her life seen Congress conduct itself like this. She said, you know, whenever we faced big challenges, we came together. And she remembers the toughest of them, without question, the Great Depression and World War II, and other big challenges. But like she said, the problem with Congress is they refuse to sit at the same table, come together, and really stay together until we find solutions to these problems. That's the only way it's ever going to work.
Okay, let me ask one quick question before I go to you. How would you do that?
I would do like I did as a state legislator. Work across the aisle, be willing to look at ideas from both people of both sides of the aisle, from both parties. None of us own the best of all the ideas, and stop focusing on what's worse and try to build on what's good and best, and remind ourselves that it's not a position of weakness to find compromise. That in fact we can build from strength when we compromise and come together. In the past we've done it. We saw that in years past, but it just is not happening.
Okay, so you'll reach across the aisle. Kevin.
Well, first of all, let me give a little reminder to everybody that in 2008, America elected Barack Obama president, a Democrat Senate and a Democrat House, and no president since I've been of voting age has had more goodwill behind him than he did. He had the complete will of the people to do whatever he wanted to do for us and to us. We got Dodd-Frank, we got Obamacare, we got an out-of-control EPA, and in 2010 the public said, wait, that's too much. That's too much. And they elected gridlock. And in some respects, I think they were asking for it. Now, the problem with gridlock is nothing happens. And it's not only does nothing happen, but it's very ugly to watch. And I think the frustration at this point, I frankly believe that this election will assist some of that just by virtue of the election itself. Because we're either going to have a new president and a fresh start, or we're going to have Barack Obama for 4 more years, and I think then Republicans have to accept that that's the reality. We have to deal with it and come to that table. But 2010 to 2012 were a couple of tough years because the public is divided.
So Kevin, can I interrupt you?
Sure.
How would you help undo that gridlock?
Okay, good question. First thing I would do is run only positive ads about what I would do in Washington as a candidate for Congress. And I'm proud to say I've done that. Even my response to the attack ad against me is a positive ad about solutions. I think our politics has to be civil. You can't just in a campaign say, I'll reach across the aisle, but in the meantime I'm going to.
No, that's fine and good. That's fine and good. I don't think there'd be a person in North Dakota that would not agree with you on that subject. The question is, that works in North Dakota. Positive, people love it. Now you're going to Washington.
Well, we'll see if it works in North Dakota.
Yeah, and your positive idea is going to Washington. You're not running ahead to Washington.
Sure.
You're going to Washington working with people.
Last night in this hotel, I had dinner with Democrat Congressman Elliot Engel from New York. Why did I do that? Because he went out on a rake today to see what fracking is all about. Because he's got a constituency in New York that is terrified of fracking. What would that do? So we had dinner last night with some business leaders from New York, some energy leaders from places like Texas and Oklahoma and North Dakota to talk about fracking, to show the science of it, to inform him, because he's got a scared constituency, and to honor and respect the fact that the culture in New York is not the same as the culture in North Dakota. I would love to do more of that as a member of Congress, sitting down, breaking bread,
Yeah.
and just having civil conversation.
Okay. I like that.
So both,
Both.
reaching across the aisle.
Yeah.
And, we heard today from our panel discussions that that gridlock and that atmosphere, if you want to call it that, that's in Washington, I think I could honestly say the audience and everyone said that's not the North Dakota way of getting things done. And it's not North Dakota, and it's not the way North Dakota citizens want to see things take place. So, like your attitudes on that, and whichever one you are there, we hope you to be the poster child for that.
Yeah.
And it's hurting our country that we're not.
Yeah.
That's the most important.
All right, should we move on to
Yeah,
energy?
let's turn to energy.
All right. So energy is a big industry here in North Dakota, whether it's coal or biofuels, uranium. I mean, it's all here. And a lot of states are pretty envious of where we're at. How do we solve the energy crisis in North America?
Oh, it's easy.
Is it?
Yeah, you just turn national energy policy over to North Dakota.
All right. Fair enough.
I had an interesting experience recently in Washington, and it was with a number of members of Congress, and Paul Ryan said, well, what exactly was your pitch when you were tourism director in North Dakota? And I said, well, when I was tourism director in North Dakota, we're the least visited state in the country, but as an energy regulator, I feel like Walt Disney, because everybody knows our brand.
True.
They're curious about it. To the point where, I mean, I speak all over the country because people want what we have. Now, we have to acknowledge that not everybody has 24 billion barrels of recoverable oil under the ground. Not everybody has, 800-year supply of lignite coal and uranium and all the things that you referred to. But if we would bring the North Dakota model, that is to say, not only knowing how to regulate, but knowing when you don't need it to regulate. Trusting the natural order of things, doing what we've done in North Dakota. Because while we're the second leading producer of oil, the leading producer of lignite, sixth leading exporter of electricity, we also meet all ambient air quality standards as prescribed by the EPA. We have the richest topsoil in the country, and guess what? The people that own the land, live on the land, and require the sustainability for their own livelihoods know how to manage it better than an EPA bureaucrat or me. The first thing I do is rein in the EPA. I appreciate that the House of Representatives has tried to do that. I regret that the Senate hasn't. But we have to fight for appropriate regulatory reach.
All right.
Well, we need a national energy policy that really does support, I think, across the board, development of all of our energy resources. We've got so much here in North Dakota, we know that. And it can not only be the model of the nation, but I think we can be the leaders in helping bring it about. I suggested last week at I think it was the Lignite Energy Forum, that regardless of who gets elected in this presidential election, I'd love to see the Secretary of Energy come from North Dakota. Yeah. I think, why not? I think we've got a really well-qualified set of senators that represented this state well across the aisle. They understand the issues better than anything else, and why not bring that right to the White House and be part of the cabinet. But, there's so much more. We have to have a national energy policy that supports our goal of energy independence. And then we have to make sure every agency within our national government supports that as well. And so the overreaching by EPA and on regulations is a problem. We have to, I think, rein it in. We have to remind people that in order for us to find that balance and to really support and develop all of our energy resources, we've got to have the support of the regulatory bodies as well. And I support keeping that focused here with a partnership with the state. It's not surprising as a state legislator that would be my priority. I think we should work together with the federal government, but that we need to continue to be able to help support our own regulatory policy through the state of North Dakota.
So you hit on something we heard this afternoon from all of our energy experts on our panel, and that is some kind of plan. And their idea of a plan, a more comprehensive plan, and whether it's using all sources or whatever it is. But today, they feel real strapped that they can't really invest. They can't invest in energy in our state or other states, that the investment part of it is going away because they don't know what's out there in the future. They don't know what regulations might hit them. They don't know, and one of the things they talked about was, at least don't touch the things we've already done, but that's happened in the past. And EPA has come in and made change things that they invested in the past that are now moving into the future. When you go and look at this, you start talking about energy. What do you see in this energy policy to make them more comfortable to invest, to become self-sustaining?
Several things. Let's remember, and yes, it did come out earlier, that the enemy of investment is always uncertainty. Because in an uncertain climate, the investor has to consider the worst case scenario, which usually means that you're not going to invest. The problem is that for the last 4 years, the certainty that the administration aspires to is the worst case scenario. There is a war on coal. There is a war on fracking. It has got to be stopped, and we can play nice all we want, but that is real. Those attacks are real. They're attacks on our energy security. They're attacks on our economic security. They're attacks on jobs and opportunities. So we have to get, I think that Congress has to get very aggressive with the regulatory overreach, not federalize fracking, for sure. Trust the state agencies. The things you're talking about, Roger, I know very, very well. Our electric utilities, many of them are in the room right now, are represented by people in the room, have never had to deal with more than one EPA rulemaking, major rulemaking at a time. Today they're dealing with a dozen of them. The same regulations, by the way. The Clean Water Act is still the Clean Water Act. The Clean Air Act is still the Clean Air Act. But we have overzealous regulators. These elections have consequences. So there's got to be now, with regard to policy, by the way, you don't hear me very often say we need a comprehensive energy policy. We need a lean environmental policy. Policy, the choice of what energy source you use, whether it's coal to generate your electricity, or gas to heat your home, or what car you drive, ought to be left up to consumers. Consumer choice will lead to the most efficient price and the product that the market demands. I think that the national energy policy ought to be a consumer policy.
All right, Pam, and then we're going to go to some questions, I understand.
Well, I do disagree with that. I think we need an overall national energy policy that provides certainty. And you heard that from the panelists today. What they seek more than anything is to know where they're at. We farm and ranch, and we have to make business decisions, every farming cycle based on the things that we know. What are the markets? What are the prices? What are the costs of our input? It's no different in the energy industry. And what are the regulatory potential here? What does it mean in terms of our restrictions and our burdens? So I think it is important. And we all know that the technology around energy is just going to continue to grow. We're drilling in places we never imagined we'd drill 10 years and even 5 years ago.
Try my backyard.
I know.
All right.
But that's all because of advanced technology. So we have to continue to invest in that as well. And the one area I think we probably agree on, we just have to make sure that we allow for much more certainty in the area and remove I think the uncertainty of overregulation.
But see, I've got to take some issue though, because certainty,
Can I stop you?
because certainty that this is an area I know a lot about, and I see my partners in the industry. We have the lowest retail residential electricity rates in the country. The certainty that some people aspire to would double those rates. That's not an acceptable certainty. Utilities will every time take certainty, because if guys like me will say, sure, you can recover the cost for that gold-plated boiler, they're happy to invest in it. But somebody's got to look out for the consumer.
All right, so we have a question right out here.
Sure.
If you could identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Ellen Schaefer. I'm a volunteer with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I'm an oncology nurse by profession. This year, 3,510 people in North Dakota are expected to hear the words, "You have cancer." According to the American Cancer Society, one person dies every minute from cancer. That's 1,500 people per day. To put that in perspective, in 9/11 we lost 3,000 people to cancer. And that's unacceptable, because we lose that many people in 2 days to cancer. We need more dollars allocated to cancer early detection, prevention, cancer screenings, and quality of life issues. This year, my brother was diagnosed with kidney cancer. My mom died in 2006 of lung cancer. I have many more family members who are battling cancer today, or who have already lost their battle to cancer.
Ellen, what's your question?
I was just getting to that.
Thank you.
But I wanted you to understand where I was coming from. So my question for you is today that if you were elected to office, what would you do to allocate more funding for cancer research so that no other family has to hear the words, you have cancer?
Thank you, great question.
So I think this is beyond cancer. I mean, cancer certainly is a major issue, but there are other diseases and things that are impacting people like cancer. So overall question, what role does government play in that whole research area for healthcare?
Well, it is one of the most important areas that government does play. There's very few other avenues for the investment in medical research than government. It is in our best interest, obviously, as a country to keep our people well. There's nothing more devastating, having been diagnosed with breast cancer a number of years ago. I mean, it just takes your breath away. It changes your world and your approach to everything. You see things very differently. And believe me, since being diagnosed, I have put a lot of my energies in helping support those groups who support breast cancer research. And it's critically important. And all across, we see it in every area of healthcare, really. Families are affected by just challenging diagnoses all the time. We have to continue to make progress on it, and the only way really is going to be through more government research investment.
Thank you.
Ellen, great question, and I appreciate your setup too, because I think it is important. I don't think there's anybody among us, I'm sure, that hasn't had an experience in our families or perhaps personally with cancer. But I think you get right to the heart of what I think Pam and I agreed on tonight, and that is that things like early detection, things like prevention, which includes research and development, are really appropriate uses of the aggregate resources of our society through government, especially in the early stages of research and development. But at the same time, let's remember that there are people in politics who will attack the pharmaceuticals, for example, and others that will come up with treatments for making obscene profits, as an example. And yet, we know full well that many of the great innovations and treatments of cancer and other diseases, Roger, you're right, I think cancer is, of course, the best illustration of it, come from the opportunity that the private sector has to make a profit, and use that profit to reinvest into further research and development. So I think it's twofold. I think it's aggregate resources of the government and the unleashing of the ingenuity of the private sector.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
My name is Kayla Schaefer, and I have a question about energy. You guys talk a lot about energy independence, regulations, but the U.S. Chamber has a website called No Project, where it states that 45% of energy projects, whether renewable or traditional, were killed by NIMBYism. So what's your answer to that? Because it doesn't matter if it's a wind farm, if you're talking about opening up federal lands, if 45% of projects are killed by special interest groups or residents, how are we going to achieve energy independence? And how is Washington going to address that?
Thank you. Roger wants an oil well in his backyard.
we don't suffer from NIMBYism. Here I call it PIMBYism. Please in my backyard. You know, could we please have an oil well in my backyard? Well, I don't know that Congress or that politics can do a lot about that except to use our influence as best we can within our circle of influence. It gets back to my example of Congressman Engel and I last night at dinner talking about this, having him out on a rig, seeing, because when he goes home to New York, he's just one more educated person on how safe fracking is. But we ought to use our circle of influence to tell a good story and to help our constituents understand. Leadership's tough. Leadership is, on one hand, a reflection of your culture and the people that you represent, and on the other hand, a responsibility to help them better understand it. In the meantime, places like North Dakota get to benefit from it. You know, there are states all over the country, in fact, the state of Washington in the Pacific Northwest is considering rolling back its renewable portfolio standards because of the high cost of the credits. Well, we love that other states will pay a lot for renewable credits because we have so many of them to sell here because we're not foolish enough to have a renewable portfolio standard. So there are advantages to living where we live, but we also have a struggle on the national level because, yeah, there's a lot of untapped resource that's under the ground and above the ground.
Thank you.
Well, we're always going to be a country that allows for that kind of debate, of course, when these projects come up. But I really do believe that part of what we need to each of us be doing is help educate, help people understand better about, you know, it's so easy to think that you just walk to the wall and you switch the switch on and suddenly you've got electricity, you've got power, you can run anything in your house, and boy do we all whine when, you know, something happens and we're without our automatic washers and dryers for an hour or two. But that doesn't just come. It comes because, of course, here in the state of North Dakota, we have this tremendous coal industry that helps provide over 50% of the power in this country. And so anytime we can find the opportunity to educate people, I know as a farmer and rancher, it's the same thing. I find myself all the time helping people understand better about where their food comes from. That these are real men and women out there making business decisions and working very, very hard to make sure that they can just have the luxury of walking through a store and grabbing stuff off the shelf.
We have one more question.
Is it a Schaefer? Because only Schaefers get asked questions.
Apparently, yes.
David Schaefer, Straley here. Just a yes or no, maybe to short it up. But cap and trade last year, effectively the state of North Dakota lit up in angst against cap and trade. And I'm just curious, if elected to Congress, you know, what your position is on that, and would you support it or would you not?
I would not.
I absolutely would not, and I have fought it with every breath I've had as an energy regulator in this state. Yes.
All right. Thank you so very much. You know,
Maybe one more follow.
all right.
I'll give you one more chance. I'll give you one more chance.
You are up here.
You know, we heard from both sides today, and I'll address this question one more time, is that it kind of almost heard from the audience in your hearings go around, and I hear this in my circles. People are mad. They're just mad about everything going on in Washington. They're mad at the way campaigns are handled. They're just mad that people can be so mean to each other when they're elected to go and look at our future and deal with our future. What's your approach to that? What are you going to do when you get there? I mean, fall into that realm when you get there? What are you going to do to change the people who are there? You kind of gave us part of that answer. We give you one more chance.
Well, we can't. We can't. There's too much at stake. It has to be a game changer. We've got to start moving this country forward. I say I'll do as I did as a state legislator. In 2007, I co-sponsored the major education reform bill in this state. I was asked to by our governor at the time. I did it in a bipartisan way. It was important. It was important to our schools, to our families. It's what you do. You set aside a lot of this. There's time for debates, there's time for great discussion. We're going through all of that now. And then you set that aside and you roll up your sleeves and you get to work on behalf of the people of this state and this country.
Roger, I think there's only so much you can do within your own realm, but you have to do all you can do within your own realm. I think part of it, quite honestly, you know, when I'm in DC, I often look around to see if I'll see Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner having, you know, lunch together or something. You know, I bet people long for the day of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan or George Mitchell and Bob Dole, who, if they didn't like each other, you couldn't tell. And I think part of it really is, are you a relationship person even? And then I think you have to make a conscientious effort. I think it has to be deliberate. It might seem natural to us, you know, because I think it is natural to us.
Yeah.
And I agree for those for whom it's not. But I think for those of us whom it is, we have to be deliberate. Frankly, I'm going to tell you one goal I have, and I'm going to seek a Democrat member of Congress in my first week that I can love. Somebody that can be a friend, an accountability partner, somebody that maybe has a similar experience to mine in growing, whatever the case might be, and then make a commitment to that person. I think you got to start with one.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you both of you.
Thank you.
right.